Let's go.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call to order the town board work session for April 10, 2024 at about 5 p.m. As always, we are running this meeting remote and Zoom. We've got our owls here that are, if folks want to join, they can join on Zoom. We're also live streaming to Facebook, to YouTube, and to our website. Any questions about how to get involved in the Zoom for our meetings is right there at the top of each of our agendas. So next up, I'd like to ask Councilor Nicholson to lead us in the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So with that,
Sarah's first.
Okay, so who's running the slide?
Yes. Lisa's pulling that up, so if you wanna start talking, she'll get that up and running.
So this is about very prettily done general code. So back in the day, let's see, this is the second one, so 6 years ago, we approached General Code as a company that does the 360 and all those things. So they do municipal coding is what their job is. And we met with them and said, you know, our code is kind of in bits and pieces, we update sections, but the whole thing hasn't been redone and state laws have changed and we'd like to do sort of a refresh of it. And they started it in 2019 and then COVID happened and everything stopped. So we had some dialogue with them around refreshing our codes to be in compliance with current law and with trying to sort of update some of the language. And I'll give you an example because I'm me. Everything in the code said councilman, and we wanted to say councilor, and those kinds of changes that they would just sort of fix automatically throughout the whole thing. So that was the direction we were going in. And then over the course of the past several years, we have passed a lot of new zoning ordinances, other kinds of ordinances that are even less well stuck in the pages of the binder. And so now it's a chance to really go through the whole thing. So the team at the office has spent 4 months now really reviewing that everything that we've done. So they built on, we did get a report back in 2019 that was some of the grammar stuff fixed. And now going through and updating it, like what have we actually changed since then? And looking at what may be areas where there's actually a policy issue to address, so that they're going to present to us now some things where we cleaned up all this stuff, we updated these things because laws changed, and then here's things that it's up to the town board to actually decide, do you want it to be this way or do you want it to be something different? Then general code will take all of this back and make us brand new clean binders that have everything current as of 2024, which we can hopefully use for several years before they become outdated again. So that's sort of the gist of why we are here.
So I'll just kind of walk you guys a little bit through the timeline as we see it. We're having this initial work session to kind of separate out the larger issues. We suspect that we will need a follow-up work session just because there is a lot to this, and this is a major overhaul of the code itself. Some decisions are small, we'll go over that. Some decisions are big and need consideration and input. And as you can see, we've called the boards together, so we have, you know, the town board, the planning board, and the zoning board together. We are going to distribute, or we're going to collect all of your feedback from the different boards. So Carrie will go over in just a second. We kind of have a binder put together for everybody that you can go through and provide your feedback. And then we expect that there will be a final work session where everybody will kind of go over, hey, this is what we've come to. This is how we made the decisions. And then we're gonna start holding public hearings. And so there are different things in here that we might separate out, different separate local laws that we'll separate out. That's largely gonna be what Tom will go over at the end of the presentation. So I'm gonna kind of try to go through this stuff very quick because he's got the bulk of the stuff to go through, so. Lisa's got her exciting information.
Yes.
So
So we currently use have a blue code book. We'd like to change it to green with white lettering so we can distinct code from, anything 2024 on, will be a green binder.
That sounds great.
Thank you very much.
In your binders, you'll see you got different sections. The first section is a copy of the PowerPoint, so you guys can review it at a later point if you need to. The second section is the actual general code that they sent us with the different codes that they have suggested we review. So that's in there, and there are some notes in there, which I'll go over as Tom gets to his and Allison finishes. And then planning and zoning, Tom's gonna go over that with you guys as well. Those are just some things that he sees issues with. And then our fees and penalties. And then a part of our major decisions is to have the board as a whole to look at the definition for family. To see if maybe we can define that a little bit better for our codes.
And Carrie really did the bulk of putting the binders together and was really instrumental in figuring out the process. So as we move forward, you guys should feel free to reach out to her and then to everybody on the committee, just to kind of ask those questions if you have those kind of procedural questions or whatnot, outside of the discussion of what to decide.
Well, I think just before we really dive in, there's a lot of information to digest. So what I would suggest is, as we're moving forward, any specific questions, try to jot those down. If we have some time at the end, we can jump in. But, like I said, there's just a lot to cover, and we'd like to get through the whole presentation so that, we start off in a good spot, and also that this work session is good. Exactly.
Yeah, there's post-its in there.
There is.
I was just gonna bring that up because I forgot those.
Great job.
So there are no
Just for
sections.
reference, there, in the agenda, there are these handouts are
Yep, in the
clickable.
work.
And then each of the planning board, the zoning board will have their own binder and they will be submitting them.
So I want to give everyone a flavor of what we called we separated them into two buckets, right? There were some low impact decisions, and those were things that this committee made, the decisions that this committee made itself versus the things that we need input on. But we wanted there to be full visibility on the different types of decisions that we made, and then they are in the packet as well for you to review. So if you make sure you look through them, and I think you've kind of put some notes in there as well about our low impact decisions.
So in the code packet, I went through any ones where we were looking for the major decisions. I just put like a little box next to that code with kind of what we were looking for from you guys as the board, as well as for these low impact decisions, I kind of put those in there as well. So anything that we have in here is also gonna be just documented in the codes for you guys to have a little bit easier review to see what codes had versus what we're looking for.
So, first off, you'll see the chapter 11, code enforcement officers, they wanted to add in just some simple words and language to clarify. So that does not have a substantial impact. You will see decisions like that made throughout the code, just add in the word and, add in the word the, clarify this. And then you can also see here too that they had recommended some chapter changes. So we made decisions like that. All of us, there was consensus, and so if there was consensus, we moved forward with that. Peddler and solicitor, they really wanted us to clarify here, what does it mean, good moral character and things like that. So we really looked at that, we evaluated it, we talked about it. We also have made some recommendations here where we've looked at other codes, they've provided input on other codes. I would highly recommend to, even after this process, that the board take some time and they really evaluate the peddler and solicitor chapter of the town code. It has been my experience over time that can be a very frustrating process for residents. And that is something that has been on the to-do project for a very long time. Maybe consider adding a page to the website where you can put current peddlers and solicitors that have licenses out there with their pictures, because when somebody knocks on their door at night, people get upset and they get frustrated. Also put some language out there about the kinds of peddlers and solicitors who are actually peddlers and solicitors who don't have to register. But that was not for this time, this was just for some clarification, but put that on your to-do list for the future. Our professional fees section of the code, we had a missing word. And We don't know why, but that happens sometimes. You guys have been here in the heat of battle when we're passing laws. So that was a moment where we sat down and we thought, okay, what kind of word should go in there? I think we came up with 4 or 5 of them, and we ultimately landed on evaluate, so that the town would otherwise evaluate a municipal application. That's a low impact decision we made. They also made recommendations on things that were either currently part of New York state law or things that had evolved since we had adopted parts of our code. So I don't know if anybody was here when we did best value. Maybe you were here, Sarah, but I can't remember. But that was part of our procurement policy. So that said that, you know, we could evaluate different bids and look at them and say, hey, this person provides a better value, even though they're a higher dollar amount. So there was a section that needed to be added in there, and so we opted to revise as they had indicated. And then we also had some chapters that just don't need to exist anymore. So the retirement incentive program, they said that we should delete the chapter, and we agreed, but know that we had reached out to, you know, the person who knows. We reached out to Anne and said, hey, do you agree that we should delete this chapter? And she said yes. Chapter 44, the animal section of the code. There were a lot of different recommendations that were made within this chapter that were very low impact decisions, but it was my recommendation that in this section of the chapter, you add some language in there that's saying that our SPCA contract would supersede any section of the chapter. So one of the things, for example, is that you are required by law, and this is a rough example, this is not actually what's written, but you're required by law to hold a dog for 10 days before putting it out for adoption. Well, the SPCA's policy is to hold that for 15 days. The SPCA is always going to adhere to New York state law and any other laws because they are a shelter and they get inspected and they have to follow those guidelines. So we didn't want to get into a situation where we have the town code that says one thing, but we have a contract with a service that says another thing. So I just put a note in there to recommend that we add language like that. That was a low impact decision. Blood damage prevention, they talked about changing fees. That was another low impact decision. Again, here we reached peddler and solicitor, and you know, we wanted to incorporate the sentence as well. I just don't want to stand here and read this all out to you because I want to give Tom time to really flesh those things out. Snowmobiles, chapter 113. They asked if the listing was still accurate in terms of roads that you weren't allowed to snowmobile on. We talked to the highway superintendent. He gave us his recommendation and we made that as well. And then another common thing that we encountered was where we had made a substantial change to the code. For example, the TMEC doesn't exist anymore, the Environmental Council, and it was still written into different parts of our code. So where we found things like that, we did address that. And then last but not least, we ran into a lot of recommendations that related to our penalties and our fees. So we have some fees that exist, and they are not violations or misdemeanors under the penal law. They are just, if you were to do something that was in violation of the town code, we would charge you through the courts a penalty for that. And then we have other instances where it says, if you do this, this is a misdemeanor or this is a violation. The penal code supersedes all of that. So we went through the list and we had some conversations, you know, Sarah and I talked and the committee talked about, hey, maybe we need to put a chart together and adopt, you know, change all of our code to say, we see the adopted code chart during the beginning of the year that we would, or the code or the fee chart that we would use in the beginning of the year. But we ultimately decided that that was not very practical. And because the penal law supersedes that, so we just took all of the recommendations that they put throughout the different aspects of the code, but we wanted to break it all down into a chart so you guys could see that and understand what you were agreeing to in essence when this draft is put together. So like Carrie said, there is a huge section of your binder that talks about all the different places within the town code that you'll see those penalties and fees. And you should also know that we consulted with Judge Rothschild on this, and he gave us some really sage advice and said, you know, as you're doing this and you're maybe adjusting fees, don't say it will be a fee of $500 or a penalty of $500. give me some room to work because of how the judicial system works, so up to $500. And so, you know, that was great advice, and we used that. We also talked to the town of Manlius Police Department, and they basically said, hey, if there is a section of criminal law that we can use, we are not going to go to the town code. We are going to use that because that is better. So we said, okay. So now I'm gonna turn it over to Tom, and you guys are gonna have a lengthy discussion, I'm sure.
I know it sounds like the bulk of this is gonna be me, but they did a great job leading up to this board meeting, and to get us to this point. Thank you very much, you guys. So the first one here on this is, terminology. On page 8, you'll see that this was the councilman to counselor. And going through that. The code of ethics, I know is under discussion with the town board and moving forward. So in accordance with that, when that comes to fruition, that would be added. I know that's being looked at, so we'll leave that in your hands. I had some discussions regarding the unsafe buildings. It talks about this on page 23 through 26. And while we have this, my recommendation is now to wait until the 2024 or 2025, it will actually hit. New York State code comes out, and to adopt what is going to be set by New York State for unsafe buildings. The goal that the unsafe building had was, I think we will be able to accomplish with some local laws that I will be proposing with the attorney for general property maintenance. So while a building is, we'll say a building is unsafe, it means that it's not secured or that there's been unwarranted access to it. So we can aid that by this local law, the general property maintenance, and we would have the ability to go and secure the building. So the unsafe building as it currently stands, when they talk about this, they'll talk about units open, maybe become places of rodent infestation, debris, things of that nature. The unsafe building, as we currently have it, addresses imminent danger, which I believe is the intent of the unsafe building code. The general property maintenance will be able to deal with a lot of the health and welfare of the public and some of the blight that was happening. Or if you, for instance, say there's a fire at a home where there is no readily available property owner, we would have the ability after due diligence to go and be able to board up that structure. So I think with that, and the future local laws that will be proposed, that the unsafe building until the 2020, I'm gonna say 2025, because that's when it's gonna hit, but it's actually called the 2024 code. When that code comes out, we can reference that new standard that's set forth by New York State. And if we find that the local law for unsafe structure with the general property maintenance does not suffice for the use within the town, we can go back, revise, and look at that. Let me do this now. So chapter 104 is entitled Sewers. And with that, I would draw attention to the chapter. This chapter references actually septic tanks and the removal and operations of septic tanks within the town. I believe this might be a little bit of this was passed in 1991, and the purpose of this, so we might want to change the article of this to, or the chapter from sewers to septic tanks. But what this talks about is licenses being required, applications for license, issuance of license for haulers. With that, I would advise that we work with our town attorney and see what is required and mandated. The resources required to continue with this would need to be evaluated to ensure that compliance with our local laws are done. So this is a chapter that we should be looking at with our town attorney for what the steps would be to move forward in compliance with that. Any questions regarding that one?
I think if I understood it correctly, the issue of this was, do we really want to come driving around looking for somebody who's pumped out sewers to find out if they have their permit?
Pump out sewers and or
Just septic tanks,
just septic tanks.
yes,
And that's why we should change it, the name to septic, because it's.
yes.
So it's misnamed and it's also maybe something we don't want to do anyway.
There could be the naming of this and then, what the town wants to do moving forward.
And
With
whether the
such
health
action.
department is already responsible for this.
If there's another agency that would be looking at this, similar to that of like a trash truck or leakage of a trash truck.
So, like driving around, like, to ensure that next septic service or something.
That's the problem
Or
with
something like that, has
saying, yeah,
licenses and not
anybody
like
that's,
the homeowner's doing it or something.
yes.
Okay.
And if they are, and if the homeowner is discharging their septic waste, that is a very, that would be a violation of multiple different agencies.
Or if it's a county facility that's leaking waste into Limestone Creek. Behind somebody's house.
They have to decide it.
And continuously paying.
This one, we were actually, I believe we were on page 37. This was the parkland fees that we were going to address. Sarah, I don't know if you have anything that you want to say about this, but this is part of a fee that we would collect and what we would be doing moving forward for collecting them, whether the dollar amount, the continuation of it, how we would address moving forward with parkland fees.
So this kind of relates with the comprehensive plan that we don't currently have a town park, but the goal was to perhaps look at having a town park, in which case this would make more sense. My understanding is that this is on the books, but it is not routinely collected, so we would need to be consistent whichever way we go with it.
Yep, absolutely. All right, I want to preference this section with, let's keep this simple. Let's do not overthink this one. I'm gonna speak on it for a couple minutes, but let's not overthink this. This is the definition of family. And I know this is going to come up with that of ADUs and how we evaluate what a family is when it comes to housing, but I believe this is the services that we are providing for a dwelling unit to a family. Now, where family may come into play is when you talk about group homes within the municipality and how they are referenced. That gets into, for myself, when we start talking about care, I can look it up, I can give you it, but there's care facilities and things of that nature that we would look at that we have in the town already currently and how we would move forward with that. But the definition of family, as you will see, there is a page in here in the back where we took from the town of DeWitt, who has a little bit, the town of Mount Pleasant, who has one line, town of Pittsburgh, and then the town of Ithaca. So I don't think we want to be telling people what their family consists of, but I think there are, when in the town's eyes, we are providing services for families. So if you have 2 family dwelling units, or you have a family with an ADU, that is how we'll be defining families. If someone has a family of 15 people and they build a house to accommodate that, then we're not gonna restrict how many family members you have here as the municipality, but I think what we need to do is when you start talking about having families, as I would call it, living independently of each other and us providing services to them, whether it be water, trash, fire, EMS, things of that nature. So I would advise that we speak with, again, our attorney and see what we want to do, but again, I would say we keep this as simple as possible to not overcomplicate the definition of a family. Any questions about that one?
Why is it say no revision desired? Like 56.
What page are you on?
56.
That's for the,
Yes.
that's for the one that started on
Oh,
page
okay.
55.
Thank you, Mary.
It says no revision desired right above that.
That's for the other one.
That's for the one just
It does
before.
look like that, and Alyssa, I had the same problem a couple times, I'm like, what?
Just because
Why
it's the second page, that's
Yeah.
what's throwing me there.
That, I don't know if there's a better way to do that, but I understand what you see there, because I had that same problem.
Well, it's getting about the other pages, just because it's supposed to the second page
Yeah.
where it's throwing me.
Again, you'll see, general code did do a good job with giving us information to help make determinations, and they put some case law has found that the rights of the municipality to regulate the number of unrelated persons living together is restricted. So how we want to establish that, I believe more, again, is in regards to the services that we provide as a municipality.
Tom, are the ones that are currently under that section, number 1 through 5, our current definitions?
No, those are
Right.
recommendations.
Okay.
If you want, we currently have, I don't know if you want me, you can,
No, I
it
don't.
is under zoning, chapter 155-3.
Yeah.
It is family, I can actually read it, it's an individual, 2 or more persons related by blood, marriage, adoption, or guardianship, or a group of not more than 4 persons not related by blood, marriage, adoption, or guardianship, living together as a single household unit. So I believe there is some work to be done with that, but I would say let's not overcomplicate the definition of it and there absolutely no means restrict anybody in regards to a family and their
Would that
private
affect,
house.
like, our conversations we had about, the ADUs?
So I know we talked a little bit about it, and, you know, this is where if family was how we're defining a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Then,
We'd be consistent throughout the rest of it.
and really as we're looking towards ADUs, it's more about not necessarily a family or 2 families, it's more about the actual physical characteristics of the dwelling, if that makes sense. So the goal is, let's keep our definition of family simple, focus on the services that are provided, and then where possible, focus on physical characteristics as well as in other places.
And we're not considering having multiple definitions of family throughout different parts of the code
I think we'd
and
like to
law.
leave it all.
Okay.
If it is as broad as possible too.
On page 57, you will see that they put the non-conforming definition. We have a non-conforming chapter in the zoning code. It is, Article 5, non-conforming uses, which goes through existing buildings, change of occupancies, reconstruction, continuation of non-conforming use, alterations, extensions, abandonment, and change to higher classifications. When this becomes applicable, I think is if we were to start doing the form-based zoning or changing large areas when we do our zoning overhaul, we'll want to look at the non-conforming use definition. If there's a way that we can change it now that would fit the future use, I would recommend that. But again, unforeseen what the future zone changes, if any come of form-based zoning or just a broad overview to align the town with the comprehensive plan for zoning throughout, what we would want to do to ensure that any previously conforming home is properly classified. Again, they just have a definition. We have a chapter. We could add a definition similar to this or modify our chapters to look towards the future of what the town would be providing. Sign restrictions on page 59. There were some Where are we? Okay. I believe what I would like to do is there's some conflicting information within the sign code. Is it right now we're having the ability to have the planning board and myself approve them. I believe right now, the planning board and Lisa, when she reviews them, doing a great job of having them propose the signs. So we should be looking at, and again, we in the zoning. No, this just has the planning board. Looking at our sign ordinance for what they have for content and approval through them for the process to ensure that when the site plan is done, that the planning board is reviewing those signs.
Can we just clarify for anyone watching at home who's not familiar, we're not talking about state sign, I don't even know if they want that or not.
This is a
You're talking,
private business sign.
right, a business sign,
Correct.
this opens up 50%.
But I think it's time for the code to evaluate sort of the realities that are out there. Electronic signs, lighting of signs, but we're very traditional in what we allow right now. There's a lot of other things that are available. Technically, people are not supposed to have this fluffy banner thing, but they do it anyway, and we don't want Tom spending all this life pulling banners out of the ground. So, I think we need to deal with what's actually happening in the world and look at the ordinance with that in mind.
And I think that would be the perfect time to do that would be when a site is going through the site plan review with the planning board. And I mean, I'm more than willing to review signs that come in separately for on an existing building or a freestanding one within the restrictions that the code has put forth, but a review overall of the sign code for that. The following items are, you'll see that under planning and zoning. These are just general housekeeping items for cleanup of the town code, going from town board to planning board, changing chapters when we redid the building code, chapter 59. 13 is now 4, you'll see that twice, and then again, town board to planning board. Any other questions?
Back on the unsafe buildings, is that part of farm buildings?
Yes. Any structure that has imminent danger, which would be structural failure, and even if there was, if a farmer had an excess of explosives or fireworks or toxic gases or things of that nature, we could start deeming those buildings unsafe due to the imminent danger.
But a roof caving in doesn't.
Would definitely count. Collapse of a building, partial collapse of a building's structure would automatically result in an unsafe
And
structure.
what are the consequences when that happens? What would you envision as the procedure?
The quickest procedure is to go through the town board process for unsafe structures, which is outlined in chapter 63. Another step that could be done if a structure is imminent danger is we would take it to the Supreme Court. We could start with the town court to work with the property owner and having them correct it. But ultimately, if it was the demolition of a building, again, the quickest way is through the town board, otherwise the Supreme Court. Correct?
So in this instance, so the first thing is the owner would fix it themselves, but then if they don't or can't, that there's a place where you would set it.
And again, when we start talking about unsafe structures, the difference is if a structure, if there's a small fire in a portion of the building, and a vacant structure, the general property maintenance code would allow us to go and board up that structure. As unsafe would mean that it is accessible by people that are not the owner occupant. And we would be able to board up that structure, and then we would go through the proper steps after, but the structure would be secured, and so then it would not be unsafe. I mean, if a structure has a fire and walls collapse, the roof is in, then again, it's already an unsafe structure. If there is no owner occupant, that is where we could step in with the unsafe structure, through our local law. And it could be strengthened, but I would recommend to see what the 2024 code has from New York State and what revisions they're gonna put forth for that.
What happens if, say, a farm building is unsafe, they know it, they get talked to, and they just knock it down and leave it in a pile? What is demolition? Is there a definition for that?
Generally, we would,
Remove
I would work with them and I would consider the remainder of the building rubbish. And then give them a allotted time to remove the rubbish from the property.
So that's cared for in the remainder of the code.
It would remove the unsafe structure violation, but there would be a new violation for rubbish on the property.
Any questions of the
Burdick Street, that house up by the creek,
Yes,
that was unsafe.
that I would need, well, we were given that by the property owner who was looking to come forth with that to renovate. We first came for the subdivision, right? And then when we went there and looked at it for the subdivision, then that's when all the questions started getting asked about it. Because no one was occupying that structure, there's no action brought forward. The structural soundness of it, again, with him working forward to resolve the issues as the contractor to either shore up the foundation and get through that process, because again, he wasn't gonna do any work on the structure that wasn't allowed. We were waiting to see what would happen with that. And yeah, if he had brought me to that structure to do a pre-site inspection for a building permit, there would have been a lot more questions, but a lot of the unsafe structures that I come across, and unsafe is different than unfit for human occupancy. Unsafe is imminent danger, which is imminent collapse, explosives, gases, or partial collapse already. So if it goes into that, because he could have come in and repaired that foundation, but yeah, I mean, it wouldn't, might not have been my option, but it was an option for him. But that one, again, a lot of the times if something like that happens, it's either brought to our attention by a complaint or fire, EMS, the police, somehow that happens. Any house that's boarded up by, let's say, a landlord, when a tenant moves out, would not, just because it's boarded up, doesn't mean that it's unsafe, but they've done the proper steps to secure the building. So I'm not moving forward with, because there are code sections that talk about when there is a vacant structure, that any combustible material has to be removed in case there is an issue, so firefighters aren't walking into a vacant home and having, a variety of issues, walk into a living room full of gas cans or oil or something like that. So we can actually request from property maintenance companies that they supply us with pictures that prove that a structure is safe when it is vacant.
That's why the Fremont Roadhouse is so dangerous.
That one, yes. Anything else for me?
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it, that, you want to do it, very efficient.
ample time to discuss anything that you might need, and there is a lot to,
So I think,
yeah.
can we pull the timeline back up?
Yes.
Because I think that's gonna be kind of the most important thing to take away today.
Right, is obviously the last one.
Because again, there's 60 pages of stuff that we all need to take the time to read through. What, in the conversations that we've had, is what would be really helpful is produce, like basically, put your questions into your material so we can bring those back. Because not only is that gonna help collect everything, it'll save it from having to, track 100 emails and stuff like that. But it's good too, because we'll have a record of how we kind of approached all these changes. And that's why they went to the great pain to put these great binders together, so,
So, I know it said in there about like coming back to like through the ZBA chair and my board chair, are the two other boards gonna have like a work session themselves to do that, or is it just gonna, you just anticipate that it's compiled to like Carrie or?
This is recorded, I think the presentation would be just the same presentation for anybody.
Well, I meant like if there's any questions.
Well, yeah, the idea was that you guys would have a conversation within your meeting and bring, collect all the input and bring it back as one thing.
That was the extra meeting we had talked about possibly having for ZBA. That's when the ZBA will get together, and Carrie has one of these. She'll make the notes and give me the binder to hand back in. So it's all in one section and we're not duplicating questions from each board. And the planning board plans on doing the same thing.
So with us.
so just as, I don't look at the timeline here. But today is the first item, and then, tentatively, we have a work session ready for May 8th. I mean,
Do you guys all meet before May 8th? Is that realistic?
so that would be a good place to, as everyone has filled out some questions, kind of come back for clarification. It's a free-form conversation at that meeting, we're not gonna go through a whole presentation. But, it's the sooner we can identify all the issues that we wanna bring up and talk about, ideally we give, whoever is answering these questions a few days heads up so that they can prepare answers. And then you see on the 23rd, that's when we want everything back in town hall. That's gonna give the team enough time to review, compile the eventual code changes. And then, like you see, we've got the final work session. I would imagine we'll probably be reviewing the kind of compiled changes. And then that way, this just keeps us on a really nice, tight, simple timeline so that we can, get into implementation as we get towards the end of the year. So, and then depending on what we see, if we ever, if we see the 24 code early, we can incorporate that. If not, we'll have a clear break of when these are the changes we're making, and then we'll have to, kind of reconsider what happens with the 24 changes.
John, just so you know, the ZBA plan on meeting on May 9th, because
Okay.
our agenda is pretty heavy for this next meeting, or the April meeting. But I'll see if they have anything they want to bring up on May 8th. I'll make sure I try to
Well,
bring that
I
up.
guess I'm just, because wasn't that May 9th the same as the seeker training?
Yes,
Yeah, so we had a problem with that date anyway, so maybe we could go to ZBA about maybe meeting at a different time,
okay.
so that they can go.
My hope is, sir, is that our agenda is not heavy for our May meeting, which would be before this 23rd date.
Yeah.
And we can just attach it to the end of your regular meeting for May versus having that extra meeting. So I'm just waiting for that deadline, which is, I think, next week or the week after, to be able to make that determination. Right now, we don't have anything on the agenda for the May
Oh,
meeting.
yeah,
So we might be able to just push it to that, yeah.
So just a reminder that there is the seeker training on the 9th, on the 9th at 6:30, that any of the board members, and thank you for getting back to me, any of the board members can come to that, to get a refresher on seeker.
We had talked about, and met a couple of us, on doing a, kind of an update to the site plan review application checklist.
You were going to hear about that at the next meeting?
Okay.
Well, I'm gonna follow up with that. There's something I heard. That it was not part of this general code review, but it has come up, several times, whether it be with variances or site plan or the ADU. There has been discussion of implementation of bulk requirements for lot coverage, for modifying side yard setbacks for certain structures, allowing certain structures in your front yard or where that would be. So there are definitely some zoning items that I think want to be reviewed moving forward that are not part of this, but I think need a broader discussion with both the planning board, the zoning board, and the town board for how those would move forward, because we've had, I know right now in the ADU law, it talks about all requirements for, I mean, again, I don't know how much you want to regulate it, but we have garages that can't be above 17 feet, but that doesn't stop you from having a house, you know, based on the building code, there's restrictions, but, you know, there's no general height requirement for a house in a subdivision. Put in requirements or regulations that would aid future development to more be in line with the comprehensive plan, whether it be for green space, for accessibility, walkability, things of that nature when it comes forward. So there are definitely some other zoning items and that would help with
Yeah, so
the site
we
plan.
had talked about, we currently do have a, site plan review in our code 155-28 that includes an itemized list of things that people need to include with their site plan application packet that Lisa gets and reviews. And we talked about kind of updating this list and having it be a little bit more, user-friendly and easy to do. I did a code review of all of the towns in Onondaga County and assembled all of their stuff with which we could, you know, reference or pull from or whatever. Maybe I'll send an email and include you on that so you can see where we're at.
Well, that's, if you've already done that survey of me, what other people are doing, that's great. Thank
Yeah,
you.
so the next step
That's a
is
lot.
to come up with a draft of what we, you know, to discuss. So that's where I'm at.
But, I think, quite honestly, the planning board wanted to produce a suggestion,
Yeah, that's,
because like, that's the thing, it's like, you know, I think we have an idea of what goes on, but you guys are the ones that are doing it on a monthly basis.
right.
So if you guys wanted to say like, hey, we've reviewed everything else, this is the draft that we think makes a lot of sense, I think that would be a great way to have that conversation.
Right,
And this
so
could be a good time to do that.
that's what I was thinking, is maybe that was kind of the goal I had for this year, was to get that worked through. So maybe, you know, we'll work on that and bring it to you guys and we can incorporate it when you make your big changes.
And then from the ZBA point of view, one of the things that I'd like the input of, if everybody who comes for a template site plan adjustment is always approved, then why not just reduce the site setbacks? If it's 30 feet and every time anybody wants it to be 20, it's fine, then let's just make it 20 feet. Like, why do we have to make everybody go through these extra hoops to just put a shed up? So I really would like us to think about this, you know, probably you still wanna have something, you don't wanna, you know, the shed 2 feet from the line, whatever, but if you just say, everybody who wants to do it within some kind of frame, we always say yes, then let's just move the line. So I really think now is the time to think about those things, because the ZBA, you know, just sometimes pushes back, but usually just says, okay, do what you want. Same with the height requirement, my shed, whatever it is, everybody who wants their shed taller, you say yes. So let's just say you can have it taller. Not, you know, not 60 feet tall, but maybe 17 is too short. And you need to, you know, if you're gonna put, I don't know, a boat in there, it needs to be tall. So those are the kinds of things, now is the time, we'd love to hear those things, say, let's just relax some of these. We don't need to make residents wait 2 extra months to put their shed up because they have to go through some process with the municipality.
I think it should be based on the zoning, so it's a more broad overview of it, but I do agree that there could be some review of it. But also when you think about that, and I know this has come up, where certain things, you know, you would think, but then you look at a parcel out in Chef's Road, like out way Kirkwood, I say way out because it's like, it's up there in the Twitter, but like 5 minutes, 2 minutes from Lisa's house. Then you see it and you're like, well, you know what, that doesn't fit, or that or, you know, this area, it's not accommodated there, so I think it's hard. I think the ZBA does a great job of evaluating each one. But maybe setting some restrictions, maybe for R1 versus RA, and R2, R3, the Homewood area versus, and then like commercial requirements for, industrial CA, CB, things of that nature.
I
But
know
it
we had
is,
discussed potentially you could tie some setbacks to lot size. So if the lot is huge, then maybe the setback is bigger, but that way too, it's, again, like Sarah was saying. The goal is, if we know 99% of people are coming to the zoning board and it's gonna get approved, we can reduce the work of the town, but then also reduce what the residents have to do to kind of.
Sure, and that can be a fact-based decision. I mean, you can just look at the variances granted over the last 5 years, 2
Yeah.
years, and pick a number and have something to work with. And if it is truly 100% of the time, we always grant the variance, then yes, that would be a sliver of opportunity to make a change now while the getting is good.
I do think it does, definitely the lot size does a factor, because we see a lot of them from Homewood and then from like Richmond and Davis and that neighborhood over by Fremont.
Yeah.
But some of it does have to be also, it depends on some of the things we get presented. Some of it doesn't fit the neighborhood too, so you wanna be careful in what you allow, like, we just had one that we denied that it didn't fit where the way you wanted to do it, but there are
And there-
exceptions to it too.
and there was one that was, it was next to a farm field, and the resident came in and said, well, what about future development? How does that impact? It's like, well, right now it's just farm fields, but they do a phenomenal job assessing each case by case basis, so I wouldn't wanna take it, away from them, because they do a great job of actually reviewing site specific, but again, if we look at it go by a 5-year based on zoning classifications of R1 versus RA, then that might be able to better guide us towards
Sure, and then
what
you're
is
making a
allowed.
decision based on, is this really just a procedural issue, or is it, is it incident based? I mean, do we need to think,
And
future
sometimes
hazards?
it's topography. I mean, I've seen you dealing with, there's a cliff, and so people can only put it where they can put it, and then you have to evaluate
See
that.
that a lot with the pools. And to give them credit, Canon and they all do a good job of trying to get the residents' plan to fit before even coming to us. There's a lot of rock to deal with around.
That was all I had, that there is items out there that aren't part of this, that have been kind of
So,
wanting to be talked about and implemented, but again, I think it's a broader discussion for how the comprehensive plan plays into the new zoning, and if we are gonna modify our zoning to ensure that anything we're doing right now looks to the future, 10 years down the line, so we don't have to go through this process again when we rewrite our zoning.
and
'Cause
so
if you,
I would encourage everybody that if there is one of these other things that's sort of related but not identical, that now is the time to get that on the table, so maybe that won't go to general code, this June, but it's on the list of things that we will review. Like, this definition of family you kind of called out, is that's a cross issue, and maybe there's some other cross issues that we just want to get some kind of work group or a survey like what Aaron did of all the other zones, other codes to say how do they deal with it. There's things like that we could look into to kind of get us our brains on some of these issues that seem to be lingering and not quite resolved.
Well, I think too, is just set up the queue of the things that we're gonna be, that way too, at the end of this, if we can say, hey, there's 8 things, how do we prioritize them, what does it make most sense to tackle first versus, and then I think using, at the end of this, we can say, hey, this was a good process, couple work sessions, some, solid ways to give feedback, if that's something that's productive, then we can kind of use this model, kind of moving forward for a lot of different stuff. Anything else? Anybody? Any questions, comments?
Thanks for coming.
Well, so it's a work session, so we don't do a motion to adjourn, right? All right, work session's over.